On the 18th of February 1745, I was born into a wealthy family, in Como in northern Italy. Both my parents, my mother, Donna Maddalena, and my father, Filippo, came from high-class Catholic families. I was a very introverted child, and even by the age of 4, I wasn't speaking. My family thought that I was unable to speak, that I lacked the intelligence to do so. Despite this, I was sent to the local Catholic school, run by priests, and by the time I was 7, I had surprised everybody. Far from being stupid, I was really quite clever. At this time, my father died, which affected me deeply, and I became even quieter and less communicative. My uncle, who took over the responsibility for my education, and the teachers at school, wanted me to become a _reist. This had been the career of other members of my family, and it seemed suitable for me, too. I, however, was not interested in joining the church, and I refused. My family's second career choice for me was law. I wasn't very keen on becoming a lawyer either. When I was 15, I started studying natural philosophy at school. I was a good student, and I also liked reading and studying languages, something I appeared to be talented in because I learned to speak Latin, French, English, Dutch, Spanish, Russian, and Greek. I liked writing poetry, too. My real interests, however, were physics and chemistry. I was fascinated by the way things worked, and I read all the science books I could find, especially if they were about electricity, which I was real interested in. In 1763, when I was 18, I started to write letters to a French physicist, who was also a _priest, called Jean-Antoine Nollet. Nollet had been doing experiments with electricity. In 1748, he had invented the electroscope, a machine that could find whether there was an electric charge present in something or not. He was also fond of demonstrating the results of his research, and his lectures soon became popular. One spectacular demonstration was done in front of King Louis XV at the Palace of Versailles in France. Nollet managed to pass an electrical charge through 180 people. For this demonstration he used 180 soldiers and something called a Leyden jar. This was an ordinary glass jar which was lined with paper-thin sheets of tin, a metal, and 3/4 filled with water. At the top of the jar there was a cork through which passed a thin metal wire. The wire was attached to a metal chain outside the jar to allow the electrical charge to pass into the jar. Nollet asked the soldiers to stand in an open circle and hold hands. When he told them to, the first and last soldier each touched the jar, completing the circle. The electricity passed through each soldier at the same time, with the result that all 180 soldiers jumped into the air simultaneously. The king was highly amused by this and made Nollet repeat the demonstration using priests. Nollet did many other demonstrations and experiments, and news of his work spread throughout the scientific community. I had decided not to go to university to study when left school. At this stage one had not yet started doing my own experiments, and I really wanted to learn as much as I could from Nollet. He later became the first professor of experimental physics at the University of Paris. I was also in contact with Professor Giovanni Battista Beccaria of the University of Turin, and I sent him a paper I wrote in Latin called On the Attractive Force of Electric Fire. Later, in 1769, it was published. I started doing my own experiments. This was a slow process and I made many mistakes. I also learned a great deal, and in 1774, when I was 29, I became professor of physics at the Royal School in Como. 10 years previously, a Swedish physicist called Johann Wilcke had invented a generator which produced static electricity. In 1775, I invented an improved version of his generator, called the electrophorus. My invention was more useful because it was able to produce a larger amount of static electricity and to produce it continuously. Later it was developed so that it could store electricity. In 1777, I went to Switzerland and met with a physicist and geologist called H. B. de Saussure, who helped me develop my ideas, and I continued my research. I was looking at atmospheric electricity and at the instruments Saussure had developed to measure it. I was able to alter his instruments to make them more accurate so that electrical tension, as it was known, could be measured. In 1881, many years after my death, the unit of measurement was named the volt in my honor. As more people in the science community noticed my work, more opportunities became available to me. The next year, my attention turned to the chemistry of gases, and in 1778, I discovered a dangerous gas which was later called methane. One day when I was on holiday, in a boat on a lake, I saw some bubbles coming up through the water. The air above the bubbles smelt horrible, and naturally I was curious to discover what it was. I managed to get some of the bad-smelling air back to my laboratory and found that it was inflammable, that is, that it burnt easily. As the gas had come from beneath the ground, I continued my research. It was discovered that methane was a gas that was present in mines, and because of its inflammable nature it was extremely dangerous. In 1779, I moved to Pavia in northern Italy, where I became professor of experimental physics at the university. 6 years later I became rector, the head of the university, but I continued to do research. Electricity was still the subject I thought most about. Each summer in our region there were giant thunderstorms. I was fascinated by the noise of thunder and sparks of lightning and wondered if we could capture the power I was seeing and use it. Meanwhile, I started looking at frogs. In 1791, an Italian physicist and medical doctor called Luigi Galvani had been working on a theory he called animal electricity. He noticed one day while working in his laboratory that the leg of the dead frog he was examining moved when it was touched by a spark of static electricity from a metal instrument. The frog's leg itself gave off tiny sparks of static and it jumped as if it was alive. Galvani suggested that it was the liquid in the frog's leg that carried an electric current. I repeated Galvani's experiments myself, and at first I thought his suggestion was correct. However, as I looked more closely and did more experiments, decided that he had been wrong. It wasn't the frog's leg that was conducting the electricity, allowing the electricity to pass through it, but the metal that Galvani had been using to connect parts of the frog. My future work on batteries would confirm my findings. In 1794, I received the Copley Medal from the Royal Society of London for my work on Galvani's original research. 1794 was also the year I got married. I was nearly 50 when I met a young woman called Teresa Peregrini, who was the youngest of 7 daughters. Her father was a wealthy man from my hometown of Como. Teresa's father would not let her get married until her 6 sisters had got married. She was much younger than me, but it didn't matter, and after she was finally allowed to marry me, we started our family. Sadly, only 2 of our 3 sons survived to adulthood. In 1799, I discovered the Electrochemical Series, which measures how reactive different chemicals are, that is, how each chemical behaves when it comes into contact with other chemicals, and I continued experimenting. One day later that year, we had dramatic results when I created what was called the Voltaic Pile. I combined copper, zinc and cardboard with salt water, which I placed on top of them. Then I attached a piece of wire to the top and bottom, through which an electric current would pass, if the ends of the wires were touching. It would become the first electric battery. The following year, I made the first working battery, which produced a steady stream of electricity, by again connecting copper and zinc with a wire. I sent my findings to Sir Joseph Banks at the Royal Society of London, making my results available for other scientists to work on. Among others, William Nicholson and Humphrey Davy developed the Voltaic Pile battery further, and until the first electric generator was invented by Michael Faraday in 1870, the whole of the 19th century electrical industry was powered by battery. In November 1801, I went to France and gave 3 lectures at the Institut National de France, which Napoleon Bonaparte himself attended. I was made a member of the Institute, one of only 8 foreigners. In 1805, Napoleon honored me with the Légion d'honneur and, to my surprise, also gave me a considerable amount of money in recognition of my work. In 1806, I was also honored in my own country, when I received the Cavalier of the Italian Royal Order of the Iron Crown. Then in 1809, I became a senator of the Kingdom of Italy. In 1810, Napoleon gave me a title, Count Alessandro Giuseppe Antonio Anastasio, a high honor indeed for a self-taught scientist. Outside of work, I lived a relatively quiet life, and in 1813, I moved on from lecturing. My aim was to continue the search to advance the understanding and application of physics. In addition, I wanted to help the new generation of innovators to do further research into electrochemistry. I was made professor of philosophy at Padua University in 1815. By the time I was 74, in 1819, my health was not good and I decided it was time I retired. In 1827, when I was 82, I died at my home in Como, surrounded by my family, my wife and our 2 sons. At the time of my death, there were many young men who followed on from me: Michael Faraday, 28 years of age, George Ohm, 30 years old, and Joseph Henry, who was 22 years of age, or just a few of them. I never met these new inventors, but their discoveries, and the knowledge of electricity they inherited from scientists of my generation, were the foundation for the Industrial Revolution.